Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about picking a stack for business prospects. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Hi Frederick, big fan of your content. I am a mid-level slash senior React developer from Europe. I'm looking to eventually get a job as a contractor in the US. What backend stack do you suggest me to pick up from a business perspective? Java, Node.js, or PHP? Well, I would say that it depends on what you mean by business. So basically, the way that I interpret it is that there's one or two paths for you. So either you're talking about business in the sense that you're going to be more of a freelancer type of deal where you provide services to an end customer of some sort. In other words, you build a system for somebody else and then you deliver the system in some format. Either you run it yourself or you just send the code to them. Like there's a million ways of doing that, right? Or you work as a consultant on behalf of, like, you're basically selling your services to a company that pulls you in as a resource, sort of the same way. Like, for you guys who may not be all that familiar with this, it's extremely common, at least here in Europe, to have, I like to say 80-20. It's not always 80-20, sometimes it's 75% or so forth. Like, there's always a ratio for especially the large corporations where they have some consultants and some in-house, like, full-time employees, and they try to keep a good ratio there. And the reason behind that is usually that there might be a fluctuation, like budgets may change or the economy might take a downturn or things like that. And if they have some people that are consultants, that gives them a little bit of shorter, well, it gives them more to work with, like where they can sort of remove people and add people or so forth and so forth. There's a range of different strategies for this. And so for a lot of the consultants, what that usually means is that you will be working either with only other consultants on a project for some company, or you will be a consultant in a team of some other consultants or in-house people or so forth. You're basically the same time as a full-time hire, but from a contractual perspective, it's different. So if you are going to be, let's talk about the first one. If you're going to be if you're already a React developer, a full stack React developer, and your intention was to be a freelancer, then I would suggest Node.js. The reason being because if you're going to use Java or PHP or something like that, it doesn't really benefit you as an individual, because as a freelancer, assuming now that you don't have any requirements on the product stack, because in some situations you might have that. That's for sure what's going to happen if you're a consultant. But if you are just selling websites to people, it's the best thing for you is usually to optimize your own productivity. Because if you think about it from a business perspective, most of the applications that you could possibly want to make are going to be possible to make with Node.js, at least in terms of backend development. So, like, adding PHP, it doesn't really benefit you in any way, because basically what's going to happen is you're going to have to learn PHP when you could have just skipped that and just used JavaScript directly. Because if you know how to use React, well, then the leap to JavaScript or TypeScript, or depending on what you're using, it isn't that far. Like, then you can you don't have to, like, learn a second language and then have two languages. It's the same thing with Java. So if you're using TypeScript, I would go as far as to say, okay, this is just my personal opinion, of course, I would say that for most intents and purposes, using a TypeScript stack with React and Node.js, you're going to be able to build 99% of the applications on the web. I can't, like, I love Java. I like C Sharp. Like, I work in these languages on a daily basis, and I of course like Node.js and TypeScript and stuff like that as well. And I can tell you from experience, guys, that using .NET and Java and so forth, it's really, like, if you know how to use TypeScript and do that efficiently, the learning, like, the thing that I usually sell people on is that Java and C Sharp, especially Java, there's a history there of a lot of very useful learning materials, like domain-driven design, test-driven development, and things like that. The theoretical, like, wealth of knowledge that is in those languages is enormous in comparison to Node.js and TypeScript. It's almost a joke in that area. Same thing to a certain degree for PHP, if you ask me, at the very least. So, like, just for, like, holistic, like, getting to be a really good quote unquote backend developer, and that's what we're going to talk about next, right? It's better to use something like Java and C Sharp, if you ask me. But if you are a consultant or like a freelancer, then these things don't matter as much as shipping an end project. And in that regard, you should think about it as a business person. So what's the least amount of investment you have to make in order to gain customers and make them happy and stuff like that? And I would argue that is Node.js, because there's nothing you're not, like, no freelancer I know of that, unless they're, as I said, a very specific situation, the average website or the average web application you're going to build, you're going to be able to do that in Node.js, no problem whatsoever. Now, if you are a consultant for another company, or you're going to sell your services as a consultant, then it's more important to figure out what stacks are popular in the region that you are finding yourself in. And that is true for anybody. It doesn't matter if you're a consultant, if you're going to be a full-time hire or anything like that, because as you can imagine, in various companies, they use various languages. Some are more popular than others, and that of course depends on the region as well. Universally, I would say that the best choices are always, if you're going to do backend development, they're always on average going to be .NET and Java, or C#, .NET and Java. Like, I hope you know the .NET framework or the .NET runtime and so forth. But specifically C#, because there's not that many companies who use something like F#, even though you could, but say C# at the very least. And so what I usually tell people is that if you wanted to be the most hireable, applicable person for every single job role in the corporate world, at the very least globally now, the easiest, like the average tooling is going to be TypeScript, JavaScript, React or Angular, or like one of those two. Sometimes, I mean, both is great as well, and .NET and Java, or C# and Java. And usually Java with Spring Boot if you want to get really into the details. There are some tools choices here and there for, but like those are the main ones. These are universally, based on my experience at the very least, the most in demand tech stack skills that you can have as a web developer at the very least. And so if you're going to do backend in this regard, it's good for you. Like, I can't completely rule out saying that you shouldn't learn Node.js, because some companies, depending on your role, the front-end developers might need to maintain a Node.js backend and stuff like that. But on average, if you're going to do more serious backend work or real like full stack, it's much more common to see that companies are using like a stack such as Java or .NET on the back end with dedicated APIs, and then the front-end developers are doing things in, say, React or Angular or so forth. But there are exceptions to that rule, of course. So what I want you to take away from this is that, if I can't speak for the US specifically or so forth, but I can't imagine it being all that much different from anywhere you go, because I've never seen I haven't seen any region where this is not true. On average, if you're going to be a freelancer and you already know something like front-end development in JavaScript and so forth, then use Node.js. If you ask me, like, every single person project I ever do, guys, I do in Node.js and TypeScript, like with React on the front end usually, because I prefer React over Angular and Vue and the others. It's just my personal stack. But I can tell you that there is nothing you're not going to be able to build with that stack. But as I said, that's only true if you're just going to build like some web application, or there are no restrictions or anything like that. You can basically build whatever you want, right? And that stack is perfect for that. And I would even go as far as to say that it used to be the case in the good old days when I started that PHP was like the de facto standard for all websites or personal web sites and web shops and stuff like that. For me, the new PHP in that, if you want to go that far, is JavaScript or TypeScript with Node.js, because you already need to know JavaScript in order to create a React application or an Angular or Vue, Svelte, Ember. It doesn't matter what you pick, right? So if you can run the same language on the back end, that's a deal. That's like a no-brainer for me at the very least. And a lot of the tools that you need to leverage in order to do serious front-end development today do require some knowledge of Node.js. And if you're, on the other hand, trying to be a consultant, do the thing I always tell you: never listen to me, never listen to anybody else. Go and check the job posting. Don't just take people at their word. Make sure that you check the regions that you're looking for employment. It's so easy. Just go to any job posting website, search a little bit, and see what the most common things are, and then focus on that. On average, I base this on my own experience. The best possible stack combination that you can have for being employable in web, at the very least, if you're looking to be a corporate level developer, like a mainstream software developer, it's going to be TypeScript, JavaScript, React, Angular, .NET with C Sharp, and Java with usually Spring Boot these days. That if you have these things, or those are the things that you focus on, I can more or less, I can't promise you that you're always going to be employable for every position, but I can promise you that that is going to be the safest possible globally now, not region specific, stack that you can pick, or the tools that you can pick. They are what the vast majority of the companies are using these days on average. Have a great day.